Hey there, welcome to my home studio. I'm Karen with Walsh of Karen's Pots and Glass, and today's video is on using GR molds and how to prevent this line from coming around if you stack the GR molds. So I do love GR molds in my classroom studio. I'm a high school ceramics teacher and I use the GR molds, and sometimes the kids will want to stack them to get a deeper mold. So if you want something more like a bowl, you can stack them. Well, sometimes the issue that they have when they stack them is they get this funky little line around on the wall where the two pieces meet together. Now, in the case of a smooth piece like this, it's not really a big deal because you can rib it out. However, if you have something with a delicate texture, it can prove to be an issue because if you rib it out, you're going to smooth out your texture and mess it up. So earlier this spring, when I went to NCECA, which is the National Council on Education of the Ceramic Arts, their annual conference that they have every spring in the US, I was walking past a booth and I saw a booth that had these, and they're the Pottery Toolkit, and Chad from the Pottery Toolkit is who I talked to, and he sent me one of these because I told him I thought it was a brilliant idea because my students constantly have issue with this. So this slips over, it's made of silicone, I believe, and it just slips right over the mold. So when you put your clay on it, that seam, it does not appear. It works really, really well. I used a roller with one of the most delicate textures that I had, and it does not show up at all with the, you don't get a seam in the wall. It's quite lovely. Now, in my demo, I did not use cornstarch, but you can use cornstarch if you need to dust your clay. My clay was it wasn't quite so soft. It was a little bit stiffer, but if you do have clay that's really soft, I would dust your clay with cornstarch first, and I'll show that a little bit later so you can see that. So a really cool tool if you are a person you like to use the stacked molds. Please check out the Pottery Toolkit. I'll put the link below in the video description, and yeah, I hope you enjoy, and it's a nice little clever idea for solving a problem that has been apparent for many. And here I'm going to use a fresh block of clay, and the first thing that I'm doing is kind of beating it down a little bit with my rolling pin to help get the clay to start to stretch a little bit. And then you can see that I'm picking it up and rotating it and flipping it as I go. I just want to do it from various angles, various sides. It helps it to stretch a little bit. This particular block is pretty stiff. As you can kind of see, the edges are getting a little raggedy there where it's kind of like wants to fold over on itself. But once I start to get it to stretch, then I can like flop it on the table and stretch it a little bit more easily. Now I'm using my 3/8 of an inch slab sticks and the rolling pin to get that slab as even as possible, so it's consistent across the width of it. And once I feel like I'm totally down to the level of the sticks, now I'm just going to smooth and rib the surface. I'm using some mud tool ribs. I'm using the stainless steel rib followed up by some of the red ribs. That compression helps to really smooth the surface. Okay, now that I have the clay smoothed and ribbed on both sides, now I'm ready to add the texture. Now I'm just using an MKM roller, and these are nice little wooden rollers that I believe they're laser cut. You can check out MKM at any ceramic supplier. This is BHR-84 if you're interested in it. But this I find it works best by using the roller board, or you could just use something that's like a long continuous stick like this for pressure. So the way that this works is I just start from the tip, and it helps you to just have an even pressure as you roll, because sometimes if you're just doing it with just your fingertips, it's a little tricky and your pressure gets uneven. And I'm going to just try to line this up as best I can, and if it's not totally perfect, I'm not really worried about it. And I picked this texture because it is a delicate texture that if I didn't have this, the cover on it, the little line from the sections of the GR mold could really affect this texture, and it would be very difficult to make repairs on it. All right, so I know it's very subtle for you to see there, but it is all nicely textured now. Okay, now I'm ready to place it on the mold. So I will get that. Okay, for this particular cover that the Pottery Toolkit sent me, I am using some GR molds. This is 4091. It's an 11-inch. And on top of that, I'm using the 9.5-inch. So it's 4094. Now, these are designed where they can stack, okay, nicely like this. And you can use it just like this, but sometimes you get that seam. So using the cover over the top of it will prevent that seam from showing up, which I think this is a really, really brilliant design. So now I'm going to put my slab texture side down gently over this. There we go. Oops, set a chunk on it. Now I'm going to just take this and try to force the edges down a little bit more. This is the trickiest part because you're now taking a flat slab and you're making it three-dimensional, so it wants to like fold a little bit, so you just have to gently ease it down. Now, one of the things to make this a little bit easier is I am going to trim off some of the extra. So as I do this, I run this underneath the edge of the wooden mold and the cover. So the extra clay, if you can get that cut off early, that helps you to get it to fold down a little bit more. Now all this slab, I'm just going to set it aside because I am going to use this for a foot ring in a minute. There we go. Okay, so now I'm just, again, going to make sure that that's touching the sides. And then I'm just going to take a rib, whether or not you use metal or another plastic or silicone rib. It doesn't matter. You just want to be cognizant of not going too much pressure right here at the corner because you don't want to create a large indent there. That's probably the most common thing that my students do as a mistake. They just start ribbing the heck out of the corner, and then they actually compress the clay much too thin there, and then they end up with a compromised piece because that corner has ended up by becoming too thin. So it's just gentle. I always tell my students, think of it like you're petting a puppy's head, right? You don't want to go overly crazy with it. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. See if it's sticking down at all a little bit more. I might have a little bit more that I can trim away. The one thing that I want to avoid is I don't want it to hook underneath the edge of the mold, because as it dries, if it's hooked underneath there, it's going to crack because of course it will shrink as it dries. Now, next I'm going to mark placement of my foot ring. It would help if I put this kind of centered a little bit more. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to mark the foot ring. So the outside and then the inside. So I'm somewhere in the neighborhood of 5/8, 3/4 of an inch. Okay, and then I'm just going to go ahead and score right on those marks. All right, so I've got lots of scoring there. Going to add a little bit of slip. This is just, you could use just water. This just happens to be my throwing slip from my wheel, so it's you know, just a little bit of water that has some clay slip residue in the bottom. I don't typically use anything that's fancy. Okay, just a little bit of moisture right there that will help it to connect. Now let's talk about the foot ring. So for making a foot ring, I make it out of a slab, and I know that GR sells their own fancy foot ring cutter, which I don't own, but I do have a corn cob holder that I have bent slightly. So I'm just cutting this out of my scrap. Now this could be cut from a straight piece, but I went ahead and rounded it since, you know, I'm going to have a round foot anyhow. Okay. And then I'm going to turn it over, and the back side, the side that was against the table, that is the side that's going to be scored. So its scoring of the back side is going to meet the scoring that is on the bowl itself that I've already slipped. Okay, so generous amount of scoring done there. Let's see. And I'm going to try to line this up with the initial line that I had marked of the placement of my foot, because it's really important that this is attached neatly. And also the other thing I did not mention, I always want to place the foot close to the angle change. So that angle change is way out here, right? So I want the foot to be out here, because if I put the foot too far in, the thing will warp during the firing, or it could warp depending on your clay and how hot you fire and everything. But I tell my students, try to put it under the angle change. It's the same thing that I teach them when it comes to placing feet on wheel thrown pieces. I always put the foot underneath the angle change so it has the adequate support it needs. Now I'm going to score these. So I did cut these ends at a bevel when I put them on. Okay, add a little bit of slip to that, a little bit more scoring. We're going to put that together. Okay. So by cutting them at a bevel, it goes together a little bit more nicely. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to dip my little wooden tool in a little water, and I just want it to slide along here. So on the exterior, I just want to kind of get this blended slightly. Okay, and then I'm also going to do it on the interior. Now this is the nice thing about having this foot ring, is not just a straight slab, like the sides of it are angled, and because the sides are angled, it gives you the ability to blend it much more easily. It does not require a coil because of the nature of the bevel here. I am going to blend together the top and sides of this. And because this was made from a slab, it should be a uniform height. Okay, now it does have texture on it there. That's from, you know, when I textured it with the roller. But as I do this last little bit of smoothing and compression, that texture really goes away. Like, and if I have a little bit of texture on there, I can always smooth it out later if I want it to be super smooth. There we go. Now I'm going to let that just stiffen up for a few hours, and then I'll take it off, and we'll talk about the seam, or the lack thereof of the seam that's on the inside. And here I'm just doing the final bit of cleaning. This is sped up, And this is a non-grogged clay, that's why I can use a sponge. Now this has been setting for a couple of hours and I'm ready to take it off. One advantage of these silicone molds is you can leave clay on the mold for an extended period of time without damaging the wood, whereas if it were directly on the wood, it could damage those molds permanently. But here I'm just flipping the whole thing. I can just lift them out like this. So it's a little bit, it makes it just a tad bit easier than having to lift the clay off the form. So now, I don't know if you can see it, but because I had the silicone form on there is no line to interfere with the texture. It's really a lovely surface. I think this is a game changer. So if you are a user of GR pottery forms and you stack them, I highly recommend that you check out the Pottery Toolkit. If you look below, I'll put a link so you can check them out and go see what they have there. It's very, very cool, neat new product, and I think it has a good demand. So I have a couple coils that I rolled that are of even thickness, and now I'm just going to flatten them some. I like to make these really thin because this is going to be a decorative edge. Okay, now I'm going to take one of my rollers. This is a different pattern from what I'm using on the inside of the bowl. So I've scored the edge. Now I'm adding a little bit of slip, or you could just use water. This is just like I did with the foot ring, just moistening this down. And I'm centering this on the rim. And obviously that's a little short, so I'm going to use another piece. Okay, now to connect these. So I cut the ends at a bevel, just like I did with the foot ring. And this one, I'm just going to trim off a little bit more. Score the ends. Add a bit more slip to the ends. And now I'm going to just take this and wrap it ever so slightly so that nice thin slab wraps over the edge in a decorative manner. You can check out my Instagram. I will be posting a picture of the finished glaze fired piece when I eventually get it out of the kiln. I haven't fired it yet. And you can find me at Karen's Pots and Glass on Instagram. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Drop me any questions that you might have below, and I'll try to get to them. And I hope you all stay creative and keep potting out there.